The sun was burning hot in the New Mexico sky as Jack Morrison rode his tired horse through the rocky canyon. The animal moved slowly because both rider and horse were exhausted from weeks of traveling. Jack had been moving from town to town looking for work, but found nothing except closed doors and suspicious faces. His water was almost gone, and his food supplies were down to a few pieces of dried meat and some old bread. The cowboy hat on his head was dusty and worn, and his clothes showed signs of many days on the trail. Jack was a man in his late 20s with sun-darkened skin and tired blue eyes. He had worked on ranches since he was a boy, but the last ranch where he worked had gone bankrupt 3 months ago. Since then, he had been drifting through the territories hoping to find another place that would hire him. He knew how to handle cattle and horses, and he could fix fences and work hard from sunrise to sunset, but none of that mattered if nobody would give him a chance. The canyon walls rose high on both sides of him, creating shadows that offered brief relief from the heat. Jack wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked ahead, trying to see how much further the canyon stretched. He thought about turning back, but he had already come so far, and his water would not last for a return journey. He had to keep going forward and hope that he would find a stream or a settlement soon. As he rode around a sharp bend in the canyon, Jack suddenly felt his horse stop and tense up beneath him. Before he could react, he saw them. Apache warriors on horseback had appeared from behind the rocks, and they surrounded him completely. There were at least 10 of them, maybe more, and they all carried weapons. Some had rifles and others had bows with arrows already fitted to the strings. Their faces were hard and their eyes showed no mercy. Jack slowly raised both hands into the air, showing that he was not reaching for the old revolver on his hip. His heart was pounding, but he tried to keep his face calm. He had heard many stories about the Apache people, and he knew that showing fear or making sudden moves would get him killed quickly. The warriors moved closer and their horses formed a tight circle around him. They spoke to each other in a language Jack did not understand, and their voices were low and serious. One warrior, who seemed to be the leader, rode forward. He was older than the others, with gray streaks in his long black hair, and his face was marked with lines that showed a life of hardship and battle. He wore traditional Apache clothing and had eagle feathers tied into his hair. The leader looked at Jack for a long moment, studying him carefully. Then he spoke in Apache and gestured with his hand. Jack did not understand the words, but the meaning was clear. The leader wanted him to get off his horse. Jack moved slowly and carefully as he swung his leg over the saddle and lowered himself to the ground. His legs were stiff from riding all day, but he stood as straight as he could. 2 warriors dismounted and approached him quickly. They pulled his revolver from its holster and searched him for other weapons. They found his knife and took that too. Then they tied his hands together in front of him with strong leather strips. The leader spoke again, and the warriors began to move. One of them took the reins of Jack's horse, and they all started riding deeper into the canyon. Jack had no choice but to walk alongside them. The rocks under his boots were sharp and uneven, and the sun continued to beat down on him. He stumbled once, and a warrior reached out to steady him roughly before pushing him forward again. They traveled for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. The canyon twisted and turned, and Jack lost all sense of direction. He wondered if anyone would ever know what happened to him. He had no family left and no close friends. He was just another drifter who would disappear in the vast territories, and nobody would ask questions. Finally, the group emerged into a wider area where the canyon opened up into a hidden valley. Jack saw the Apache village spread out before him, and he was surprised by its size. There were many dwellings made from branches and brush, and he could see people moving about doing their daily work. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and children played in the open spaces between the homes. Dogs barked at the approaching riders, and people stopped what they were doing to watch. As Jack was led into the center of the village, he felt dozens of eyes on him. The women looked at him with distrust, and the old men watched with expressions that seemed to judge him already. The children stared with open curiosity, but their mothers pulled them back and told them to stay away. Jack understood their feelings. He was a white man, and white men had brought nothing but trouble to the Apache people. They had taken land and broken promises and killed without mercy. Jack knew the history, even if he had never been part of those crimes himself. The warriors brought Jack to a large dwelling at the center of the village. It was bigger than the others and seemed to be a place of importance. The leader dismounted and spoke to the guards at the entrance. Then he gestured for Jack to be brought inside. Jack ducked his head and entered the dim interior. His eyes needed a moment to adjust after the bright sunlight outside. Inside the dwelling, several people sat on woven mats arranged in a circle. In the center was an older man who radiated authority and power. This had to be the chief. He had long gray hair and a face that showed wisdom earned through many years. He wore a ceremonial shirt decorated with beads, and his presence commanded respect. Beside him sat a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s. She had long black hair and dark eyes that watched Jack with an expression that was hard to read. Unlike the others who showed clear hostility or distrust, she seemed simply curious. The leader who had captured Jack spoke to the chief in their language. He explained something while gesturing toward Jack several times. The chief listened without interrupting, and his face remained neutral. When the leader finished speaking, the chief finally looked directly at Jack. Those old eyes seemed to see right through him, and Jack felt as though every secret and every mistake he had ever made was laid bare. The chief spoke, and though Jack could not understand the words, he knew that his fate was being decided in that very moment. The chief's dwelling was quiet except for the sound of breathing and the distant noises from outside where village life continued. Jack stood with his hand still bound and waited for whatever would come next. The young woman beside the chief continued to watch him, and her gaze made him uncomfortable, but not in a threatening way. It was more like she was trying to understand something about him that even he did not know about himself. An older warrior entered the dwelling and took a seat near the chief. This man had gray hair, but his body was still strong and his movements were quick. The chief spoke to him and the warrior nodded. Then, to Jack's surprise, the warrior addressed him in heavily accented English. His name was Grey Wolf, and he would translate between Jack and the chief. Grey Wolf's English was rough but understandable, and Jack felt a small sense of relief that he would at least be able to communicate. Grey Wolf asked Jack why he was on Apache land. Jack explained that he was traveling through looking for work, and that he did not know he had entered Apache territory. He said he meant no harm and was simply trying to survive. Grey Wolf translated this to the chief, whose expression remained unchanged. The young woman leaned closer to her father and whispered something that Jack could not hear. The chief nodded slightly but said nothing. Grey Wolf asked more questions. Where had Jack come from and where was he going? Did he work for the army or for the settlers who were taking Apache land? Was he a scout or a spy? Jack answered each question honestly. He explained that he had been a ranch hand and that the ranch had failed. He was not working for anyone and had no connection to the army or to the land developers. He was just a man trying to find his next job and his next meal. The chief spoke again and Grey Wolf translated. The chief said that many white men came to Apache lands and all of them claimed to be peaceful. But then more white men would follow and they would bring guns and soldiers. Villages would be burned and families would be scattered. The Apache people had learned not to trust the words of white men, no matter how sincere those words might sound. Jack understood this, and he did not try to argue. He said that he knew the Apache people had suffered greatly at the hands of his people. He said that he was sorry for what had happened, even though he himself had not done those things. He said that if the Apache people wanted to kill him, he would not blame them, but he hoped they would believe that he had not come to cause harm. The young woman spoke suddenly in Apache, and her voice was clear and confident. The chief and the other warriors in the dwelling turned to look at her. She spoke for several minutes, and Jack watched as the men listened carefully. Grey Wolf did not translate what she was saying, and Jack wondered what she was telling them. When she finished speaking, the chief nodded thoughtfully, and the warriors began to discuss among themselves. Grey Wolf explained to Jack that the young woman was Maya, and she was the chief's daughter. She had a respected voice in the council, because she was known for her wisdom and good judgment. She had spoken on Jack's behalf, but Grey Wolf did not say what she had said. The discussion continued, and Jack waited. His legs were tired from standing, but he did not dare to sit without permission. Outside, the sun was moving lower in the sky, and the light coming through the dwelling entrance was turning orange. Jack could hear the sounds of the evening meal being prepared, and the voices of children playing their last games before dark. It seemed strange to him that life could continue so normally while his own fate hung in the balance. He thought about all the choices that had led him to this moment and wondered if he would have done anything differently. Finally, the chief raised his hand, and the discussion stopped. He spoke directly to Jack through Grey Wolf. The chief said that Jack would be kept in the village overnight while the council made their decision. He would be given food and water, but he would remain bound and under guard. In the morning, the council would meet again and they would decide whether Jack would live or die. Jack nodded to show he understood. 2 warriors stepped forward and took him by the arms. They led him out of the chief's dwelling and across the village to a smaller structure near the edge of the settlement. Inside there was nothing except a pile of blankets and a water jug. The warriors pushed Jack inside and tied his bound hands to a wooden post that supported the roof. Then they left and positioned themselves outside as guards. Jack sat down on the hard ground and leaned back against the post. His shoulders ached and his wrists were sore from the leather bindings. He was thirsty and hungry, but he was also exhausted. A woman came after a while and brought him a bowl of stew and some flat bread. She did not speak to him or look at him directly. She just set the food down within his reach and left quickly. Jack ate slowly using his bound hands as best he could. The food was simple, but it was warm and filling. As darkness fell, Jack could see the glow of fires throughout the village. He heard singing and the sound of drums. Someone was playing a flute and the melody was haunting and beautiful. He wondered if this was his last night alive and if tomorrow he would see the sunrise or not. He thought about praying, but he had never been a religious man and it seemed wrong to start now just because he was afraid. Instead, he thought about his life and what it had amounted to. He had been born poor and had worked hard every day since he was old enough to hold a tool. He had never hurt anyone on purpose and he had tried to be fair and honest in his dealings. But he had also never done anything particularly good or meaningful. He had just existed and moved from place to place without leaving much of a mark on the world. The night grew cold and Jack pulled one of the blankets over himself. Through the entrance of the dwelling, he could see stars appearing in the darkening sky. They were bright and clear out here away from any towns or cities. He remembered his mother telling him when he was small that each star was a soul watching over the living. He wondered if that was true, and if anyone up there was watching over him now. Sleep came eventually despite his fear and discomfort. Jack drifted in and out of consciousness, having confused dreams about running through canyons and being chased by shadows. When he finally woke, it was still dark, but he could sense that morning was not far away. His body was stiff and his mouth was dry. One of the guards looked in on him but said nothing. Jack waited for the dawn and wondered what judgment would come with it. The first light of morning came slowly and turned the sky from black to deep blue to pale orange. Jack heard the village coming to life around him with the sounds of people starting their daily routines. Women were building up fires and preparing the morning meal, while men checked on the horses and discussed the day's tasks. Children's voices rose in play and dogs barked at each other. It was a normal morning for everyone except Jack. The guards came for him when the sun was fully up. They untied him from the post but kept his hands bound in front of him. They led him back to the chief's dwelling where the council had already gathered. More people were present this morning than had been there the night before. Jack counted at least 15 warriors sitting in a circle around the chief, and many more people crowded near the entrance to listen and watch. Chief Standing Bear sat in the same place as before with Maya beside him. Grey Wolf was also present and he gestured for Jack to stand in the center of the circle where everyone could see him. The chief began to speak and his voice was strong and carried authority. Grey Wolf translated in sections so that Jack could understand what was being said. The chief explained that the council had gathered to decide Jack's fate. Each warrior would have the chance to speak and share their thoughts. The decision would be made based on what was best for the tribe and what justice required. The chief reminded everyone that they must consider not only this one man, but also what message his fate would send to other white men who might come to their lands. The first warrior to speak was a man named Running Deer. He was younger than most of the others, perhaps in his 30s, and his face was marked with anger. Grey Wolf translated as Running Deer spoke with passion and fury. He told the council that white men had killed his brother just 4 months ago. A group of cavalry soldiers had attacked their hunting party without warning, and his brother had died with a bullet in his back. Running Deer said that every white man was the same and they all wanted to destroy the Apache people and take everything they had. Running Deer continued speaking and his voice grew louder. He said that allowing Jack to live would be a sign of weakness. Other white men would hear about it, and they would think the Apache were soft and afraid. More settlers would come and more soldiers would follow them. The only way to protect their people and their land was to make an example of any white man who crossed into their territory. He said that Jack should be executed and his body should be left where other white men would find it as a warning. Several warriors nodded in agreement when Running Deer finished speaking. The mood in the dwelling was tense, and Jack could feel the hatred directed at him. He wanted to say that he was not like those soldiers and that he had never hurt anyone, but he knew that his words would mean nothing. To these people he represented all the pain and loss they had suffered. Another warrior stood to speak. His name was Swift Arrow, and he was older with scars on his arms and chest. He spoke more calmly than Running Deer, but his words were just as harsh. Swift Arrow described how white settlers had forced his family to leave their traditional lands 3 years ago. They had burned the Apache camps and killed anyone who resisted. Swift Arrow's wife had died during the long march to find new territory, and he blamed all white men for her death. He said that showing mercy to Jack would dishonor the memory of all Apache people who had been killed by whites. A third warrior named Broken Lance spoke next. He was middle-aged and had a thoughtful expression. He said that he understood the anger of Running Deer and Swift Arrow because he shared that anger. But he also said that the Apache people had always been known for their wisdom and their ability to judge each person by their own actions. He asked whether it was right to kill Jack for the crimes of other men. He said that this was a question the council must answer carefully, because it would define who they were as a people. Broken Lance's words caused some discussion among the warriors. Some agreed with him while others shook their heads. Grey Wolf translated all of this for Jack, who listened with growing anxiety. He could see that opinion was divided, but he also sensed that most of the warriors favored his execution. The weight of history and grief was too heavy, and he was a convenient target for their justified rage. More warriors spoke, and each one shared stories of loss and betrayal. They talked about broken treaties and stolen land. They described how their children went hungry because the buffalo herds had been slaughtered by white hunters. They spoke of sacred sites that had been desecrated and of elders who had been killed while trying to protect their families. Every story added to the case against Jack, and he felt the walls closing in around him. Chief Standing Bear listened to everything without interrupting. His face showed no emotion, and Jack could not tell what the chief was thinking. Maya also remained quiet, but Jack noticed that she was watching him again with that same curious expression. Once their eyes met briefly, and Jack thought he saw something like sadness in her face, but he could not be sure. When all the warriors who wished to speak had done so, the chief finally rose to his feet. The dwelling fell silent immediately. Chief Standing Bear spoke slowly and deliberately, and Grey Wolf translated with careful attention to every word. The chief said that he had heard the voices of his warriors, and he understood their pain and their anger. He said that the Apache people had every right to seek justice for the wrongs done to them. However, the chief also said that they must be careful not to become like their enemies. If they killed every white man who crossed their path without judging each one fairly, then they would lose their honor and their humanity. The chief said that the Apache way had always been to seek truth, and to act with wisdom, not just with emotion. He said that before making a final decision, he wanted to test Jack to see what kind of man he truly was. The warriors murmured among themselves at this announcement. Some seemed pleased while others looked skeptical. Running Deer spoke up and asked what kind of test the chief had in mind. Chief Standing Bear said that he would reveal that when the time was right, but for now the council should consider what had been discussed and prepare themselves for what would come next. The chief dismissed the council, and the warriors began to file out of the dwelling. Jack remained in the center of the space, unsure of what would happen now. Maya stood and approached her father. She spoke to him quietly in Apache, and he nodded. Then she looked at Jack one more time before leaving the dwelling with the other women. Grey Wolf came to Jack and explained that he would be taken back to his holding place until the chief decided on the test. Jack asked what kind of test it would be, but Grey Wolf said he did not know. He only knew that Chief Standing Bear was a fair leader who would give Jack a chance to prove himself. Whether Jack could pass the test was another matter entirely. As Jack was led back across the village, he felt the eyes of everyone watching him. He knew that most of them wanted him dead, and he could not blame them for that. All he could do now was wait and hope that whatever test the chief had planned would give him a chance to show that he was not the enemy they thought he was. Maya walked away from the chief's dwelling with her mind full of thoughts about the white cowboy. She had been watching him since the warriors first brought him into the village, and she had seen things that others had not noticed. While the warriors saw only an enemy and the people saw only a threat, Maya had observed something different in the way Jack carried himself. She went to help her mother, and the other women prepare food for the midday meal. But her thoughts kept returning to the prisoner. Maya had learned English many years ago, when missionaries had come to a neighboring Apache band. Her father had allowed her to study with them because he believed that knowing the enemy's language was valuable. Most people in the village did not know how much English she understood, and she preferred to keep it that way. It allowed her to learn things that people would not say if they knew she could understand them. Yesterday, when Jack had spoken to the council through Grey Wolf, Maya had understood every word he said before the translation. More importantly, she had heard the tone of his voice and the sincerity in it. She had met white men before, and most of them spoke with arrogance or contempt even when they were trying to be friendly. But Jack's voice had been different. There was humility in it and genuine respect. He had not tried to make excuses or to convince them that white people were good. He had simply told the truth as he saw it and accepted responsibility for being part of a group that had caused harm. Maya had also watched Jack's face during the council meeting that morning when the warriors spoke of their losses and their anger. She saw him flinch when Running Deer described his brother's death, and she saw sadness in his eyes when Swift Arrow talked about his wife. These were not the reactions of a man who felt no guilt or who saw the Apache as less than human. These were the reactions of someone who understood that real people were suffering and who felt the weight of that suffering. As Maya ground corn with the other women, she thought about what her father was planning. She knew him well enough to understand that he was struggling with this decision. Chief Standing Bear was a man who valued justice above all things, but he also valued mercy and wisdom. He would not kill Jack simply to satisfy the anger of the warriors, even though that would be the easier choice. But he also could not let Jack go free without some proof that doing so would not bring danger to the tribe. Maya's mother noticed that she was distracted and asked if something was wrong. Maya said that she was thinking about the prisoner, and her mother's face grew stern. She said that Maya should not waste her thoughts on a white man who would probably be dead soon. But Maya disagreed quietly. She said that if they killed every white man without judging them fairly, then they would become no better than the white soldiers who killed Apache people without mercy. Her mother did not respond to this, but Maya could see that the words had an effect. After a while, her mother asked what Maya thought should be done with the prisoner. Maya said she was not sure, but she believed that Jack should be given a chance to prove his character. She said that his actions should determine his fate, not just the color of his skin or the crimes of other white men. That evening, after the meal was finished, Maya asked her father if she could speak with him privately. They walked to the edge of the village where they could talk without being overheard. The sun was setting and the sky was painted with shades of orange and purple. Maya told her father about her observations of Jack and about the things she had noticed that others had missed. Chief Standing Bear listened carefully, as he always did when his daughter spoke. He valued Maya's insight because she had a gift for seeing the truth in people. She could look past anger and fear to see what lay beneath. The chief had relied on her judgment many times before, and it had never led him astray. He asked Maya what she thought Jack would do if he were tested, and she said she believed he would surprise them. Maya explained that she had watched Jack when he thought no one was paying attention to him. She had seen him look at the children playing in the village, and there had been sadness in his expression, as if he remembered being young and carefree himself. She had seen him observe the elders with respect and the warriors with understanding rather than fear. Most importantly, she had seen him accept his situation without begging or making threats. He had dignity even in the face of death, and that spoke to his character. The chief asked Maya if she trusted this white man, and she said she did not trust him yet because trust had to be earned. But she believed he deserved the chance to earn it. She reminded her father that the Apache way was to judge people by their deeds, not by their words or their appearance. Jack had not yet had the opportunity to show through his actions what kind of man he was, and without that opportunity, they would be killing him based only on assumptions. Chief Standing Bear was quiet for a long time after Maya finished speaking. He looked out at the darkening landscape and thought about all the Apache people who had died, because they had trusted white men who proved to be liars and killers. He thought about the responsibility he carried as chief to protect his people and keep them safe. But he also thought about the responsibility to maintain honor and to act with wisdom rather than blind hatred. Finally, the chief told Maya that he had decided on a test for Jack. He explained what he had in mind and asked for her opinion. Maya listened and then nodded slowly. She said that it was a good test because it would reveal Jack's true nature. A man could lie with words, but he could not lie with his actions when faced with a genuine choice. If Jack passed the test, then he would have proven himself worthy of mercy. If he failed, then justice would be served and no one could say that he had not been given a fair chance. The chief thanked his daughter for her counsel, and they walked back to the village together. Maya felt nervous about what was to come because she had spoken in favor of Jack, and if he proved to be unworthy, it would reflect badly on her judgment. But she believed in what she had seen, and she was willing to stake her reputation on it. Tomorrow would reveal whether her faith was justified or misplaced. That night, Maya could not sleep easily. She lay on her bedding and stared up at the roof of her family's dwelling. She thought about all the white men she had encountered in her life, and how most of them had looked at her as if she were something less than human. They had called her people savages and had treated them with contempt and cruelty. But Jack had not looked at her that way. When their eyes had met, he had looked at her as an equal, and had shown respect even though he was the prisoner and she was free. Maya wondered what Jack was thinking as he waited in his holding place. Was he afraid or was he resigned to his fate? Did he have family somewhere who would mourn him if he died, or was he alone in the world? She found herself hoping that the test would go well, and that Jack would prove himself to be the man she believed he was, not because she cared about him personally, but because it would mean that not all white men were the same, and that perhaps there was hope for peace. Between their people someday, the night sounds of the village surrounded her, and eventually Maya drifted into an uneasy sleep. Tomorrow would bring answers, and she would learn whether her judgment had been correct or whether she had been fooled by a clever performance. Morning came with clear skies and a cool breeze that carried the smell of sage and dust. Jack had barely slept during the night, and his body ached from lying on the hard ground. The guards came for him earlier than they had the day before, and they seemed more alert and serious. Something was happening, and Jack felt his stomach tighten with anxiety. They led him to the center of the village where a large group had already gathered. Chief Standing Bear stood waiting with Maya beside him and Grey Wolf nearby. The warriors from the council were present along with many other members of the tribe. Even the children had been brought to watch, though the younger ones were kept at the back, where they could be protected if something went wrong. Chief Standing Bear raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. He began to speak, and Grey Wolf translated for Jack. The chief said that Jack would now face a test that would determine his fate. This test would reveal his true character and show whether he deserved mercy or justice. The chief explained that the test would be difficult and dangerous, but if Jack succeeded, he would be allowed to leave the village with his life and supplies for his journey. If he failed or refused to attempt the test, then the council's judgment would be carried out immediately. Jack nodded to show he understood. He asked what the test would be, and Chief Standing Bear gestured toward the edge of the village. A group of warriors moved aside, and Jack saw what they had been blocking from view. There was a deep ravine that cut through the earth just beyond the last dwellings. The ravine was perhaps 20 feet deep with steep rocky walls and loose stones that looked dangerous to climb. Grey Wolf explained that yesterday afternoon a young boy from the village had been playing near the ravine when the edge collapsed beneath him. The boy had fallen into the ravine and injured his leg. Several warriors had tried to reach him using ropes, but the angle was difficult, and the boy was frightened and in pain. They feared that if they tried to pull him up too quickly or roughly, he might fall further, or his injured leg might be damaged worse. The boy had spent the night in the ravine and was still there now, cold and scared and calling for his mother. Chief Standing Bear said that Jack's test was to rescue the boy and bring him safely back to the surface. The chief explained that this task required someone who was smaller and more agile than the large warriors who had already tried. It also required someone who could stay calm under pressure and who would put the child's safety above their own. If Jack could save the boy, it would prove that he had courage and compassion. If he refused or failed, then it would prove that he was not worthy of the mercy Maya had asked the chief to consider. Jack walked to the edge of the ravine and looked down. He could see the boy huddled against one wall about halfway down. The child was maybe 8 or 9 years old, and his face was dirty and tear-streaked. When the boy saw people looking down at him, he cried out in Apache, probably calling for help. Jack felt his heart clench at the sight of the frightened child. He turned back to the chief and asked through Grey Wolf if he would be given rope and equipment. The chief nodded, and warriors brought forward several coils of strong rope and some strips of leather. Jack examined the materials and began to think through how he would approach the rescue. He had worked on cattle drives in rough country and he had climbed difficult terrain before, but this was different because a child's life depended on him succeeding. The truth was that Jack could have refused the test. He could have said that the task was impossible or too dangerous, and that it was not fair to risk his life for people who wanted him dead. But as he looked down at that scared little boy, something shifted inside him. This child had done nothing wrong and did not deserve to suffer because of the conflicts between white people and Apache people. If Jack could help him, then he had to try regardless of what it might mean for his own fate. Jack asked for the rope and began to fashion a harness for himself. He looped the rope around his chest and under his arms, creating a secure hold that would support his weight. He tested the knots carefully because any mistake could be fatal. The warriors watched him work, and some of them seemed surprised by his knowledge and skill. When Jack was satisfied with the harness, he asked the warriors to anchor the other end of the rope to a strong post that had been driven into the ground near the ravine edge. Before he descended, Jack looked at Chief Standing. Baron spoke through Grey Wolf. He said that he would do his best to bring the boy up safely, but he needed the chief to promise that if something went wrong and Jack died in the attempt, someone else would continue trying to save the child. The chief looked surprised by this request, but he nodded and gave his word. Jack also asked that if he died in the ravine, his body should be buried properly and not left for scavengers. Again, the chief agreed. Maya stepped forward and spoke to her father in Apache. Then she approached Jack and handed him a water skin. She said something in her own language that Jack did not understand, but the gesture was clear. She was offering him water before he risked his life. Jack took a small drink and handed it back to her with a nod of thanks. Their eyes met for a moment, and Jack saw something in her expression that gave him courage. Jack turned back to the ravine and began his descent. The warriors held the rope tight and fed it out slowly as he lowered himself over the edge. The rocks were loose and unstable, and twice his footing slipped, sending small avalanches of stones tumbling down toward the boy below. Jack called out to try to warn the child, even though he knew the boy could not understand English. He hoped that the calm tone of his voice would be enough to keep the child from panicking. The descent was harder than Jack had expected. The rope cut into his chest even through the harness, and his hands were soon scraped and bleeding from gripping the rough stone. Sweat ran into his eyes and his muscles trembled from the strain. About halfway down, his boot caught between two rocks, and for a terrifying moment he hung suspended, unable to move up or down. He forced himself to stay calm and worked his foot free, carefully aware that any sudden movement could cause another collapse. Finally, Jack reached the bottom of the ravine where the boy waited. Up close, he could see that the child's left leg was badly swollen and bruised. The boy shrank back when Jack approached, but Jack moved slowly and kept his voice gentle and steady. He pointed to himself and said his name, then pointed to the boy with a questioning expression. The child whispered something that might have been his name, and Jack repeated it back as best he could, making the boy give a tiny scared smile. Jack examined the leg carefully without touching it too much. It did not appear to be broken, but it was definitely injured badly enough that the boy could not climb on his own. Jack would have to carry him up, and that would make the ascent much more difficult and dangerous. He looked up at the faces watching from above and wondered if he had the strength to do what needed to be done. But there was no choice and no time to waste. Jack untied part of his harness and refashioned it to create a secure hold for both himself and the boy. He gestured to the child, showing him how they would climb together. The boy seemed to understand and allowed Jack to lift him carefully. Jack positioned the child against his chest with the injured leg protected, and then called up to the warriors that he was ready to begin the climb back. The climb back up was the hardest physical challenge Jack had ever faced in his life. With the boy secured against his chest, every movement required twice the effort, and balance was much more difficult to maintain. The child was small, but his weight was enough to throw off Jack's center of gravity and make each foothold uncertain. The warriors above pulled steadily on the rope, but they had to be careful not to pull too hard or too fast because that could slam Jack and the boy against the rocky wall. Jack moved one hand at a time, finding grips in the stone and testing each one before trusting it with his weight. His fingers were bleeding now and his arms felt like they were on fire. The boy whimpered against his chest, and Jack spoke softly, trying to comfort him, even though neither understood the other's words. The tone was what mattered, and Jack kept his voice calm and steady, despite the fear coursing through his own body. About a third of the way up, Jack's boot slipped on a patch of loose gravel. He fell several inches before the rope caught him, and the sudden jerk sent pain shooting through his shoulders and chest. The boy cried out in fear, and Jack felt small hands gripping his shirt desperately. Jack pressed himself against the rock wall and waited for his breathing to steady and his heart to stop racing. He could hear voices from above calling down, but he could not make out the words over the blood pounding in his ears. After a moment, Jack forced himself to continue climbing. He knew that if he stopped for too long, his muscles would cramp and he would lose what strength he had left. Each movement was agony now, and he could feel his body wanting to give up. But every time he thought about letting go, he felt the weight of the child against him, and remembered why he was doing this. The boy deserved to see his mother again and to grow up and to have a life. That thought kept Jack moving when everything else told him to quit. Halfway up the wall, Jack encountered a section where the rock face was almost smooth with very few handholds. He searched desperately for anything to grip, but found nothing that would support their combined weight. The warriors above could not pull him up this section without help from below, because the angle was wrong. Jack would have to find another way. He looked to his left and saw a narrow crack running diagonally across the wall. It was not ideal, but it might work. Jack called up to the warriors and gestured to show them he was moving sideways. They adjusted the rope to give him more slack, and Jack began to work his way across the wall toward the crack. This was even more dangerous because one wrong move would send them both swinging wildly on the rope and could smash them against the rocks. The boy seemed to sense the increased danger and held very still, making himself as small as possible. Jack reached the crack and wedged his fingers into it. The crack was barely wide enough, but it provided enough grip for him to pull himself and the boy upward. Inch by painful inch, Jack climbed using the crack as his lifeline. His fingers felt like they were being crushed, but he did not dare loosen his grip. Blood ran down his hands, making them slippery, but he wiped them on his pants as best he could and kept climbing. The sun beat down on them mercilessly, and Jack's mouth was completely dry. His vision started to blur at the edges, and he realized he was close to passing out from exhaustion and dehydration. He forced himself to focus on just the next handhold and the next foothold. He could not think about how much further he had to go or how much pain he was in. He could only think about the next movement and the one after that. Above him, Jack heard more voices, and they sounded urgent. He risked a glance up and saw that he was only about 6 feet from the top. So close, but those last 6 feet looked impossible. His strength was nearly gone, and his hands were shaking uncontrollably. The boy had gone quiet, and Jack worried that the child might have passed out from fear or pain. Jack called up to the warriors and made a pulling gesture. He needed their help for this final section, or they were not going to make it. The warriors understood, and several of them grabbed the rope. On a count, they began to pull steadily, and Jack used what little strength he had left to push with his legs against the wall. Together, they fought against gravity and exhaustion. Jack felt the rope cutting into his chest and thought it might break his ribs, but he did not care. They were moving up, and that was all that mattered. Suddenly, hands were reaching down and grabbing Jack's arms. The warriors hauled him over the edge, and he collapsed onto solid ground with the boy still clutched against his chest. For a moment, Jack could not move or think or even breathe properly. He just lay there, feeling the earth beneath him and knowing they had made it. Then there was chaos as people rushed forward. A woman who must have been the boy's mother fell to her knees beside them, crying and reaching for her child. Jack carefully loosened the harness that had held the boy secure, and the woman pulled her son into her arms. She was sobbing and speaking rapidly in Apache, rocking back and forth with the child held tight. Other women came to help, and they carried the boy away to tend to his injured leg. Jack remained on the ground, unable to get up. His entire body was trembling, and his vision was still blurred. He felt someone lifting his head and holding a water skin to his lips. He drank deeply, and the cool water was the most wonderful thing he had ever tasted. When he could finally focus his eyes, he saw that it was Maya who was helping him drink. Her face was close to his, and he could see concern in her dark eyes. Grey Wolf appeared and spoke to Jack, asking if he was badly hurt. Jack tried to answer, but his voice came out as a croak. He cleared his throat and tried again, saying that he thought he would be okay, but he needed to rest. Warriors came and helped him to his feet, though his legs barely held him. They supported him as they walked him away from the ravine toward the center of the village. As Jack was led through the crowd, he saw the faces around him and noticed that they looked different than before. The hostility was gone, and in its place was something that might have been respect or at least acknowledgement. Some people reached out to touch his arm or shoulder as he passed, and he understood these gestures were meant to show approval or gratitude. They brought Jack to a dwelling and laid him down on soft blankets. Women came with water and cloths to clean his wounds. His hands were in bad shape with torn skin and some deep cuts that would need careful tending. His shoulders were bruised from the rope and his entire body was covered in scrapes and bruises. But he was alive, and more importantly, the boy was alive. That was what mattered most. Maya came into the dwelling and dismissed the other women, saying she would care for Jack herself. She worked efficiently, cleaning his wounds with some kind of herbal mixture that stung, but felt soothing at the same time. She wrapped his hands in clean cloth and applied a cooling paste to the worst of the bruises. All the while she did not speak, and Jack was too exhausted to try to communicate anyway. When she was finished, Maya sat back and looked at Jack for a long moment. Then she spoke in heavily accented but clear English, and Jack was shocked to hear her using his language. She said that he had done a brave thing and that not many men would have risked their life for a child who was not their own. She said that her father would want to speak with him when he was rested, but for now he should sleep and recover his strength. Jack wanted to ask her why. She had not revealed before that she spoke English, but sleep was already pulling him down into darkness. When Maya finished speaking, she sat down and the dwelling remained silent for several long moments. Jack could see the council members looking at each other and thinking about what she had said. Her words had been simple, but they carried a truth that was hard to deny. He chose the child. Those 4 words summarized everything that had happened and everything that mattered. Chief Standing Bear rose to his feet and began to speak. His voice was strong and filled with the authority of his position, but also with wisdom earned through many years of leadership. Grey Wolf translated carefully. The chief said that his daughter had spoken well and had reminded them all of what was truly important. He said that the Apache people had survived for generations because they valued honor and wisdom over blind hatred and fear. The chief acknowledged that Running Deer and the others who opposed mercy had valid concerns. The safety of the village was paramount and could not be risked lightly. However, Chief Standing Bear also said that they could not become like their enemies. If they killed every person who might pose a threat without judging them fairly, then they would lose their humanity and their honor. The Apache way was to judge people by their actions, and Jack had shown through his actions that he was a man of courage and compassion. Chief Standing Bear then addressed Running Deer directly. He spoke with respect but also with firmness. The chief said that he understood Running Deer's pain and anger over his brother's death. That pain was justified and that anger was righteous, but Jack was not the man who killed Running Deer's brother, and executing him would not bring the brother back or heal the wound in Running Deer's heart. It would only add another death to the long list of deaths that had occurred between their peoples. The chief asked Running Deer to consider what kind of people the Apache wanted to be. Did they want to be known as a people who killed without mercy, or as a people who judged fairly and rewarded honor with honor? The choice they made about Jack would define them not just now, but for future generations who would hear the story of this day. Running Deer was quiet for a long time, and Jack could see the internal struggle playing out on the warrior's face. Finally, Running Deer spoke in a voice that was thick with emotion. He said that he still believed it was dangerous to let Jack go, but he would not stand against the chief's decision if that was what the chief decided. He said that his brother had been a man of honor who believed in justice, and if his brother were alive, he would probably want Jack to be judged fairly rather than executed out of revenge. With Running Deer's words, the resistance collapsed. One by one, the other warriors who had opposed mercy spoke up and said they would accept the chief's judgment. Some spoke reluctantly and some spoke with more conviction, but all of them agreed to stand down. Chief Standing Bear nodded with satisfaction and then announced his decision. Jack Morrison would be allowed to leave the village with his life. He would be given food and water and supplies for his journey. In return, Jack would give his word never to reveal the location of the village or to bring harm to the Apache people. The chief asked Jack directly through Grey Wolf if he agreed to these terms. Jack said yes without hesitation. He gave his word as a man of honor that he would never betray the Apache people who had shown him mercy. He said that he would carry the memory of this village and these people with him always, and that he would speak truthfully about the honor and wisdom of the Apache whenever he had the chance. Chief Standing Bear accepted Jack's word and declared the matter settled. The council members began to file out of the dwelling, and Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had not realized he was carrying. He was going to live. He was going to see another sunrise and have another chance to make something of his life. Maya approached Jack and told him that he should rest more before beginning his journey. His wounds needed time to heal and his strength needed time to return. She said that he would be given a place to stay for the next few days, and that he would be treated as a guest rather than a prisoner. Jack thanked her and asked why she had spoken for him when she barely knew him. Maya smiled slightly and said that sometimes you had to trust what you saw in a person, even when you did not have all the answers. Over the next 3 days, Jack recovered in the village and experienced a side of Apache life that few white men ever saw. Children who had been afraid of him before now came to watch him curiously, and some of the braver ones even approached to touch his light-colored hair. Women brought him food and checked on his wounds, making sure he was healing properly. Warriors who had wanted him dead a few days before now nodded to him respectfully when they passed. The boy Jack had rescued came to visit him on the second day. His name was Little Fox, and his leg was healing well thanks to the care of the village healer. The boy's mother came with him, and through Grey Wolf she thanked Jack for saving her son's life. She gave Jack a small carved stone as a gift and said that he would always be welcome in her home. Little Fox looked at Jack with wide eyes full of admiration, and Jack felt embarrassed by the attention but also deeply moved. Maya spent time with Jack, teaching him a few words in Apache and telling him about her people's history and culture. She explained how they had lived in harmony with the land for countless generations before white settlers came and disrupted everything. She spoke without anger but with sadness about all that had been lost and all that continued to be threatened. Jack listened and learned and began to understand just how much the Apache people had sacrificed and how much they continued to fight to preserve their way of life. On the morning of the 4th day, Chief Standing Bear sent word that it was time for Jack to leave. The chief wanted to speak with him one final time before he departed. Jack went to the chief's dwelling where Standing Bear waited with Maya and Grey Wolf. The chief gave Jack supplies including food that would last for many days and a full water skin. He also returned Jack's horse, which had been well cared for during his stay. But there was one more gift. Maya stepped forward and held out a woven bracelet made from colored threads in a traditional Apache pattern. She explained that the pattern was a symbol of friendship and safe passage. If Jack ever encountered Apache people again and showed them this bracelet, they would know that he was a friend to their people and should be treated with respect. Jack took the bracelet with trembling hands and tied it around his wrist. He thanked Maya and told her that her 4 words had saved not just his life, but had given him a reason to believe that peace between their peoples might be possible someday. Maya smiled and said that one man could not create peace between nations, but one man could show through his actions that people of different backgrounds could understand and respect each other. She said that Jack should go and live a good life and should tell others about what he had learned here. Perhaps if enough people heard the truth about the Apache and saw them as human beings rather than as enemies, then change might eventually come. Chief Standing Bear placed his hand on Jack's shoulder and spoke through Grey Wolf one last time. He said that Jack had passed a test that many men would have failed. He had shown that courage and compassion were more powerful than fear and hatred. The chief said that the Apache people would remember Jack and would honor the promise they had made to him. He asked only that Jack remember them as well and speak truthfully about what he had witnessed. Jack promised that he would, and he meant it with every part of his being. He mounted his horse and prepared to leave the village that had almost been his grave, but had instead become the place where he learned what it meant to be truly human. As he rode toward the canyon that would lead him away from the village, he looked back one final time. Maya stood on a ridge watching him go, and she raised her hand in farewell. Jack raised his own hand in response and then turned his horse westward toward whatever future awaited him. The sun was rising behind him, and the new day felt full of possibility. Jack touched the bracelet on his wrist and thought about everything that had happened. He thought about the test and the rescue and the council's judgment. But most of all, he thought about those 4 simple words that Maya had spoken. He chose the child. Those words had saved his life, but they had also reminded him of something essential about what it meant to be human. When faced with a choice between self-preservation and helping someone in need, the best part of humanity always chose to help. In the weeks and months that followed, Jack Morrison would tell the story of his time with the Apache many times. He told it to ranch hands and shopkeepers and anyone who would listen. He always emphasized the honor and wisdom of Chief Standing Bear, and the courage of the warriors and the kindness of the people who had cared for him. And he always repeated Maya's 4 words, explaining how they contained a truth that transcended culture and race and history. Some people believed his story and some did not, but Jack did not care. He knew what he had experienced, and he knew that it had changed him forever. He eventually found work on a ranch far to the west, and he lived a quiet life, never causing trouble, and always treating people with respect regardless of who they were or where they came from. He never married, and he never had children of his own, but he often thought about little Fox and wondered how the boy's life turned out. Jack woke several hours later to find the sun lower in the sky and shadows stretching across the dwelling. His body ached everywhere and his hands throbbed with pain, but he felt more clear-headed than before. He sat up slowly and looked around. Maya was sitting near the entrance working on some kind of beadwork, and she noticed when he moved. She came over and offered him water and some food. Jack ate slowly because his stomach was still unsettled from the exertion and stress of the rescue. Maya watched him and then spoke again in English. She explained that her father had called the council back together, and they were meeting now to discuss Jack's fate. She said that the rescue had changed many minds, but not all of them. There were still warriors who believed Jack should be killed regardless of what he had done because he represented a threat simply by being a white man who now knew the location of their village. Jack understood this concern, and he told Maya, through careful words, that he would never reveal the village's location to anyone. He said that even if they decided to kill him, he would die knowing that he had kept their secret. Maya studied his face as he spoke and seemed to be weighing whether she believed him. Finally, she nodded and said that she thought he was telling the truth, but that her belief alone would not be enough to save him. She explained that in Apache culture, decisions of this importance had to be made by consensus. Every member of the council had to agree or at least not stand in opposition. Right now, most of the warriors were willing to let Jack live, but Running Deer and a few others still argued for his execution. Chief Standing Bear could overrule them because he was the chief, but doing so would create division in the tribe and undermine his authority for future decisions. It was better if the council could reach agreement on their own. Maya said that her father would likely ask her to speak before the council because her opinion carried weight and because she had been the one who first suggested that Jack deserved a chance to prove himself. What she said now would influence the final decision. She looked at Jack with those serious dark eyes and asked him directly why he had risked his life to save the boy. She said she needed to understand his true motivation so that she could speak honestly to the council. Jack thought about the question carefully. He could have given her an answer that he thought she wanted to hear, but he sensed that Maya would see through any false words. So he told her the truth as simply as he could. He said that when he looked down and saw that scared child, he did not think about Apache or white people or any of the history between them. He just saw a little boy who was hurt and frightened and who needed help. Jack said that he had been a scared kid once himself, and he remembered how it felt to need someone to come and make things okay. He could not walk away from that even if it meant his own death. Maya was quiet for a long time after Jack finished speaking. Then she asked him another question. She wanted to know what he would do if the council decided to let him live. Would he go to the nearest town and tell the authorities about the Apache village so that soldiers could come and attack them? Jack met her eyes and said no. He said that the Apache people had shown him more fairness and honor than most white people he had known. They had given him a chance to prove himself when they could have simply killed him. He would not repay that by betraying them. Maya asked how she could trust his word, and Jack admitted that she probably could not trust it completely. He said that trust had to be built over time through consistent actions, and they did not have that time. All he could offer was his promise and his understanding that if he ever broke that promise, he would deserve whatever consequences came to him. He also pointed out that he had already proven something about his character by saving the boy when he could have refused or failed on purpose and claimed it was too difficult. Before Maya could respond, they heard voices outside, and then Grey Wolf appeared at the entrance. He said that the council was ready for Jack and that Chief Standing Bear requested his presence immediately. Maya stood and told Grey Wolf that she would accompany them. The old warrior looked surprised but did not argue with the chief's daughter. They walked together to the chief's dwelling where the council had reassembled. Jack noticed that even more people were gathered outside than before. Word of the rescue had spread through the village, and everyone wanted to know what would be decided. Inside the dwelling, the atmosphere was tense, and Jack could feel the weight of expectation and judgment pressing down on him. Chief, Standing Bear sat in his usual place and gestured for Jack to stand in the center of the circle. The chief began to speak, and Grey Wolf translated. He said that Jack had completed the test and had shown great courage and selflessness in rescuing the boy. The chief acknowledged that many warriors had changed their opinions about Jack after witnessing his actions. However, there were still concerns that had to be addressed before a final decision could be made. Running Deer stood and spoke with passion. He said that while Jack's rescue of the boy was admirable, it did not erase the fact that he was still a white man who now knew where they lived. Running Deer argued that allowing Jack to leave would put the entire village at risk. He said that Jack might have good intentions, but other white men would force him to reveal the village location, or he might do so accidentally. The only safe choice was to keep Jack prisoner forever or to execute him. Other warriors voiced similar concerns, though most spoke less harshly than Running Deer. They acknowledged Jack's bravery but questioned whether that bravery was enough reason to risk the safety of their families. Chief Standing Bear listened to all of this, and his face remained neutral. When everyone who wished to speak had done so, the chief looked at his daughter and asked for her thoughts. Maya stood, and the dwelling fell completely silent. Jack watched her and wondered what she would say. She had been kind to him and had seemed to believe in him, but she also had a responsibility to her people that was greater than any sympathy she might feel for a stranger. Maya began to speak in Apache, and her voice was clear and confident. Grey Wolf translated for Jack. She said that she had observed Jack carefully since he arrived in their village. She had watched how he carried himself and how he reacted to the hatred and threats directed at him. She had seen him show respect to their elders and understanding to their warriors, even when those warriors wanted him dead. Most importantly, she had watched him during the rescue and had seen him risk his life, without hesitation, for a child who was not his own. Maya then said that she had spoken with Jack privately and had asked him direct questions about his intentions. She said that she believed he was telling the truth when he promised never to reveal their village location, but she also acknowledged that belief was not the same as certainty and that her belief alone should not determine his fate. Then Maya said something that made everyone in the dwelling lean forward to listen more carefully. She said that the real test had not been whether Jack could rescue the boy. The real test had been whether Jack would choose to try. She explained that Jack could have refused the test or could have attempted it half-heartedly, knowing that if he failed, he would at least die quickly rather than face execution. But instead, Jack had given everything he had to save that child. Maya paused and looked around at the faces of the council members. Then she spoke 4 words in English that she knew Jack would understand, even before Grey Wolf translated them into Apache. She said clearly and simply, "He chose the child." Those 4 words hung in the air, and Jack felt their power. Maya continued speaking in Apache, and Grey Wolf translated. She explained that when Jack looked into the ravine, he had a choice. He could think about his own survival and refuse the dangerous task, or he could think about the scared boy who needed help. Jack had chosen the child over himself. That choice revealed everything about his character that the council needed to know. Maya said that a man who would risk his life for a child he did not know was not a man who would betray the people who had shown him mercy. She argued that Jack had proven himself through actions, not just words, and that actions were the only true measure of a person's worth. She concluded by saying that she believed Jack should be allowed to leave with his life, and with supplies for his journey, and that she would stake her own reputation on this judgment.